The house lights were already dimming at the Fox Theatre in Detroit when Johnny Cash stopped mid-step. November 23rd, 1985. 3,200 people packed into those red velvet seats, and every single one of them could feel something shifting in the air. The man in black stood there, his guitar hanging loose against his chest, staring at a girl in the third row who couldn't have been more than 11 years old. "Wait," he said into the microphone, his deep voice cutting through the opening chords of Folsom Prison Blues. The band stumbled to a halt. June Carter Cash, standing stage left with her auto harp, knew that look on her husband's face. She'd seen it before. It was the look he got when God was tapping him on the shoulder. The girl was wearing a faded blue dress that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in braids, and she was sitting perfectly still, while everyone around her was cheering and clapping. But it was her eyes that had stopped Johnny cold. Even from the stage, even through the stage lights that usually blinded him to everything past the first few rows, he could see those eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had lived through more than any child should. "Darling," Johnny said, pointing directly at her. "You in the blue dress. Would you come up here for a minute?" The entire theatre went silent. You could have heard a pin drop from the balcony to the orchestra pit. The girl didn't move. She just stared back at him with those haunting eyes. The woman next to her, who looked like she might be an aunt or a social worker rather than a mother, leaned down and whispered something. The girl shook her head. Johnny Cash had performed for presidents and prisoners, for saints and sinners, for crowds of 50,000 and audiences of 5. But something about this child made him set down his guitar and walk to the edge of the stage. He got down on one knee, right there in front of 3,000 people, and held out his hand. "It's all right," he said, his voice gentle now, barely picked up by the microphone clipped to his shirt. "I just want to sing you a song. Would that be okay?" The girl looked at the woman beside her, who nodded encouragement. Then, slowly, like a deer stepping into an open meadow, she stood up. The crowd started murmuring, but Johnny raised his other hand for silence. Never breaking eye contact with the child, 2 security guards moved to help her over the barrier, but Johnny waved them off. He stood up and walked down the stage stairs himself, his black boots clicking against each step. When he reached her row, the other people moved aside like the parting of the Red Sea. He held out his hand again, and this time she took it. Her hand was tiny in his, and he could feel it, trembling. As they walked toward the stage together, he leaned down and asked, "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emily," she whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "Emily," he repeated, loud enough for his microphone to catch. "That's a beautiful name. It means industrious and hard-working. Did you know that?" She shook her head. They climbed the stairs together, Johnny keeping his pace slow and steady. June had already brought out a stool and placed it center stage. The band members, Luther Perkins on guitar, Marshall Grant on bass, and W.S. Holland on drums, watched with the same curiosity as the audience. Johnny helped Emily onto the stool and then picked up his guitar again. He adjusted the microphone stand so it was between them and looked out at the crowd. "Folks," he said, "sometimes you just know when something's meant to happen. I was going to sing Folsom Prison Blues, but looking at Miss Emily here, I think we need something different tonight." He strummed a few chords, and the opening notes of "Daddy Sang Bass" filled the theater. But before he could start singing, Emily tugged on his sleeve. He bent down, turning his ear toward her as she whispered something. What happened next would be talked about by everyone in that theater for the rest of their lives. Johnny Cash, the man who had stared down his demons in Folsom Prison, who had battled addiction and won, who had lost his brother Jack when he was 12 years old and carried that grief like a stone in his chest ever since. Johnny Cash's face crumpled, tears started rolling down his weathered cheeks, and he had to grip the microphone stand to keep himself steady. The audience held its collective breath. June started to move toward him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked down at Emily, who was now crying too. "Folks," he said, his voice breaking. "This little girl just told me something. She whispered that her daddy used to sing bass, too. Used to. He was killed in action in Beirut 2 years ago. October 23rd, 1983. He was one of the 241 American servicemen who died when that barracks was bombed." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some people started crying. Others bowed their heads in prayer or respect. "She said," Johnny continued, having to stop and compose himself, "she said her daddy's favorite song was Daddy Sang Bass, and that he used to sing it to her every night before bed. She said she hasn't heard it since he died because her mama can't bear to play it." He looked out at the audience, then back at Emily. "She asked me if I thought her daddy could hear us from heaven if we sang it tonight." Now the entire theater was crying. Grown men were pulling out handkerchiefs. Women were holding each other. June had tears streaming down her face, and even the typically stoic Luther Perkins had to turn away to wipe his eyes. Johnny knelt down next to Emily again, this time not caring that his microphone might not pick up his words. "Darling," he said, "I know for a fact your daddy can hear us, and I bet he's got the best seat in the house." He stood back up and adjusted his guitar. Then he looked at his band. "Boys," he said, "let's make this one count." What followed was perhaps the most powerful performance of Johnny Cash's entire career. He sang Daddy Sang Bass with a tenderness and emotion that nobody had ever heard from him before. When he got to the chorus about the whole family singing together in heaven, his voice was so full of conviction that it felt less like a performance and more like a prayer. Emily sat on that stool, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling now. And when Johnny got to the second verse, something miraculous happened. She started singing along, her small voice joining his deep baritone. Johnny moved the microphone so it could pick up her voice too, and the sound of this little girl singing her father's favorite song filled that old theater like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The band played softer than they'd ever played, letting Emily's voice shine through. June moved closer, adding her harmony but keeping it subtle, supportive. The entire audience seemed to lean forward, not wanting to miss a single note. When they finished the song, the theater erupted. 3,200 people jumped to their feet, applauding and crying and cheering all at once. But Johnny wasn't done. He held up his hand for silence again and looked down at Emily. "You said your daddy's name was Sergeant Michael Patterson?" Emily nodded. Johnny turned to the audience. "Sergeant Michael Patterson gave his life for this country. He left behind this beautiful daughter and—" He looked at Emily questioningly. "Your mama and baby brother?" Emily nodded again. "A wife and 2 children," Johnny continued. "And I want everyone in this theater to know his name. Michael Patterson. Say it with me." "Michael Patterson," 3,000 voices said in unison. "Again," Johnny said. "Michael Patterson. One more time, so they can hear us in heaven." "Michael Patterson." Emily was sobbing now, but they were different tears. Tears of release, of recognition, of remembering. Johnny picked her up off the stool and held her like she was his own daughter. The crowd kept applauding, and it went on for so long that finally Johnny had to speak into the microphone again. "Now, Miss Emily," he said, still holding her, "I want you to know something. Your daddy was a hero, and heroes never really die. They live on in the people who remember them, in the stories we tell, in the songs we sing. Every time you hear this song, you remember that your daddy is singing along with you. Can you do that for me?" She nodded against his shoulder. But the story doesn't end there. What nobody in the audience knew that night was that Johnny Cash had lost his own father just 3 weeks earlier. Ray Cash had died on November 1st, and Johnny had been struggling with the grief, wondering if he'd ever reconciled with the man who had blamed him for his brother Jack's death all those years ago. When Emily whispered to him about her daddy singing bass in heaven, it hit him like a lightning bolt. It was like God using this child to tell him that yes, families reunite in heaven. Yes, forgiveness is real. Yes, the circle really is unbroken. After the concert, Johnny made sure to find Emily and her family backstage. The woman with her was indeed her aunt. Her mother was too deep in grief to come to the concert, but Emily had begged to go because she knew how much her father had loved Johnny Cash. Johnny spent an hour with them, away from any cameras or press, just talking. He learned that Michael Patterson had been a devoted father who worked 2 jobs to support his family before joining the Marines. He learned that Michael had taught Emily to play guitar on an old acoustic he'd bought at a pawn shop. He learned that the last letter Michael had sent home included the lyrics to Daddy Sang Bass, written out in his own hand, telling Emily to remember them always. Before they left, Johnny did something extraordinary. He took off his black jacket, the actual famous black jacket, and wrapped it around Emily's shoulders. "This is yours now," he said, "and whenever you wear it, you remember that your daddy is watching over you, and that Johnny Cash knows your name." But Johnny wasn't finished. 2 days later, he showed up at Emily Patterson's house in suburban Detroit. No entourage, no cameras, just Johnny and June in a rental car. He spent Thanksgiving with the Patterson family, and he brought his guitar. They sang songs and told stories, and for a few hours that grieving family felt whole again. Johnny also did something else. He established a trust fund for Emily and her brother's education, but he did it quietly, without any publicity. It wasn't until years later, when Emily graduated from law school, that she revealed this in an interview. She became a lawyer specializing in veterans' affairs, helping families navigate the benefits system when they lost someone in service. The Fox Theatre performance was recorded, as most of Johnny's concerts were, but he made sure that particular song never made it onto any album. He felt it was too private, too sacred. However, bootleg copies circulated among fans for years, and if you know where to look online, you can still find grainy footage of that moment when Emily Patterson whispered to Johnny Cash and made him cry. June Carter Cash later said in her autobiography that she'd never seen her husband more moved by anything in all their years together. She wrote, "In that moment, Johnny wasn't a star or an icon or the man in black. He was just a human being connecting with another human being in pain, and finding that in comforting her, he was comforted too." The ripple effects of that night went far beyond just Emily and Johnny. 3 people in the audience that night were inspired to reach out to Gold Star families in their own communities. A veteran suffering from PTSD who had been contemplating suicide said that seeing Johnny cry made him realize it was okay for him to cry too, to seek help, to admit he was struggling. A music teacher started a program teaching children who had lost parents in military service how to play guitar, calling it Songs for Sergeants. Johnny Cash performed thousands of concerts in his career. He played for presidents and prisoners at the Grand Ole Opry and in tiny honky-tonks. But if you ask anyone who was at the Fox Theatre on November 23, 1985, they'll tell you that was the night Johnny Cash proved that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can do is stop performing and just be human. Emily Patterson is now 50 years old. She still has Johnny's black jacket, kept in a climate-controlled case in her home. She's married with 3 children of her own, and yes, she taught them all to sing Daddy Sang Bass. Every year on the anniversary of her father's death, she plays the only recording she has of that night at the Fox Theatre, a cassette tape her aunt secretly made from the audience. The quality is terrible. You can barely hear the music, but you can hear her 11-year-old voice singing along with Johnny Cash, and you can hear 3,000 people saying her father's name. In 2003, just months before Johnny Cash died, Emily visited him at his home in Jamaica. He was frail by then, diabetes and complications from a lifetime of hard living having taken their toll. But when she walked in, his eyes lit up. "Emily Patterson," he said, his voice still commanding despite his weakness. "I've been wondering when you'd come see an old man." They spent the afternoon talking, and Johnny told her something he'd never told anyone else. He said that night at the Fox Theatre had saved him. He'd been spiraling after his father's death, questioning his faith, wondering if all his songs about redemption and heaven were just pretty words. But when she'd whispered to him about her daddy singing bass in heaven, it was like God reached down and touched his heart directly. "You saved me that night, darling," he told her. "You reminded me what it's all about. Not the fame or the money or the applause. It's about connecting. It's about remembering that we're all walking each other home." Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003. At his funeral, among the hundreds of famous faces and thousands of fans, there was a woman in her early 30s wearing a black jacket that was several sizes too big for her. When they played Daddy Sang Bass during the service, Emily Patterson sang along, just like she had 18 years earlier on that stage in Detroit. After the funeral, June Carter Cash, who would pass away just 4 months later, pulled Emily aside. "He talked about you all the time," June said. "That night in Detroit. He said it was the night God used a little girl to teach an old man about grace." Today, if you visit the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville, there's a small display in a corner that most people walk right past. It's a letter, written in a child's handwriting, dated December 1st, 1985. It reads, "Dear Mr. Cash, thank you for singing with me. Thank you for saying my daddy's name. Thank you for the jacket. I wear it when I miss him. My mama says you're an angel. I think she's right. Love, Emily Patterson." Below the letter is Johnny's response, written in his distinctive scrawl. "Dear Emily, angels don't cry, but you made me cry. That means I'm just a man, but sometimes being just a man is enough. Keep singing. Your daddy's listening. Your friend always, Johnny Cash." The story of that night in Detroit reminds us that our greatest moments often come when we're willing to stop what we're doing, no matter how important it seems, and really see the person in front of us. Johnny Cash was scheduled to play 23 songs that night. He only played 17, but nobody complained. They had witnessed something far more valuable than a complete set list. They had witnessed grace in action. In a world that often feels disconnected, where we hide behind screens and avoid real emotion, the story of Johnny Cash and Emily Patterson reminds us of the power of human connection. It reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to be vulnerable, to cry in front of 3,000 strangers, to admit that we're all broken and searching for meaning. So the next time you see someone who looks like they're carrying the weight of the world, remember Johnny Cash on that stage in Detroit. Remember that sometimes all it takes is reaching out a hand, offering to share their burden, saying someone's name out loud so they won't be forgotten. And remember Emily Patterson, who at 11 years old had the courage to whisper her truth to a stranger, not knowing that her words would echo through decades, touching countless lives, proving that even in our darkest moments, we can find light in each other. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to remember someone you've lost. Say their name out loud. Share a memory of them with someone today. Because as Johnny Cash learned that night in Detroit, our loved ones never really leave us. They live on in the songs we sing, the stories we tell, and the love we share with others. What moment of unexpected human connection has changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, and if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who's grieving or lost or just needs to know they're not alone, please share this with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time can save a life. Remember to subscribe for more stories of extraordinary moments when celebrities showed us what it really means to be human. Because behind every icon is a person, and sometimes, in their most vulnerable moments, they teach us the most profound lessons about life, loss, and the unbreakable bonds of love that connect us all.